two barefoot sisters stood on the edge of a stranger's porch at sundown and told him the one sentence that could have sent them to an orphan train or changed their lives forever. "We lost our mommy today. We have nowhere to go." And what the rancher said back would split a town in two. Clara May Bennett pulled the thin quilt over her mother's face with hands that would not stop shaking, though she kept telling herself that shaking was for children, and she was 11 now, and 11 meant steady. The cabin was too quiet without the rattling cough that had filled it for months, without the whispered prayers that slipped through cracked lips in the dark, without the soft, stubborn promise that tomorrow would be better, and the silence pressed so hard against Clara's ears she thought it might burst them. In the corner, 8-year-old Elsie rocked back and forth on the dirt floor, clutching her patched cloth rabbit, whispering the same words over and over. "Wake up, Mama. Wake up." Clara crossed the room because if she did not move she might sit down beside her sister and never rise again, and she crouched, pried Elsie's small fingers from the rabbit just long enough to take her hand, and said in a voice that sounded older than it should, "She ain't waking up. We gotta go." There was no food left in the cupboard, not even flour dust. The last of the beans had been boiled thin the night before. Their father had died the previous winter in a rail yard collapse outside Red Bluff territory, crushed under timber and iron while trying to earn enough to move them somewhere cleaner than the mining camps. And their mother had followed him slow and cruel, lungs ruined from washing miners' clothes heavy with dust that clung to fabric and breath alike. Neighbors had stopped visiting once the coughing worsened, and the preacher had said his final prayer 3 days earlier when it became clear there would be no recovery. So Clara knew what staying meant. Staying meant hunger first, and then something worse. She found the flour sack they kept for carrying laundry, emptied it, and packed 2 dresses, the tin cup with a bent rim, and her mother's leather notebook filled with remedies and scripture written in a slanted, careful hand. Then she tied it tight and slung it over her shoulder. Elsie fought her at the doorway, dug her heels into the floorboards, cried that Mama would be scared if they left her alone, and Clara swallowed the lump in her throat and said the hardest thing she had ever said. Mama ain't alone no more, though she did not know if heaven was real or if that was just something people said to survive grief. The afternoon heat hit them like a wall, dust rising around their bare ankles as they stepped onto the road, and Clara did not look back, because looking back might break her, and broken would not get Elsie fed. She had seen smoke that morning through the cracked window while counting her mother's breaths, thin and steady against the horizon, and she pointed now in that direction. "Where we going?" Elsie asked, her voice small. "Toward the smoke," Clara answered. "Where there's smoke, there's somebody." They walked until the cabin shrank into nothing, until the sun climbed high and burned the tops of their heads, until Elsie began to lag behind, first dragging her feet, then stumbling outright. Blisters rose and split, and Clara could see the red skin beneath, raw and angry. And when Elsie finally whispered, "I can't," Clara knelt in the road, turned her back, and said, "Climb on." Even though her own legs trembled, Elsie wrapped her arms around Clara's neck, pressed her hot face into her sister's shoulder, and Clara stood, feeling at once that her sister weighed nothing and that she carried the whole world. They walked like that for another mile before Clara's arms gave out, and she set Elsie down gently, and it was then that the ranch appeared through the shimmer of heat. Low house, wide porch, barn set back near a stand of cottonwoods, corral, fencing sturdy and mended, and a thin trail of smoke rising from a chimney like a promise. A black dog lifted its head near the porch steps, but did not bark. Clara stopped 10 feet from the porch and swallowed the taste of copper in her mouth, because asking was harder than walking, harder than carrying, harder even than closing her mother's eyes. The front door opened, and a tall man stepped out, broad-shouldered, sleeves rolled, hat pushed back, a pale scar cutting across one cheek like a lightning strike that never quite faded, and his eyes moved from Clara to Elsie to their bare feet to the flour sack and back again, and he said nothing for so long that Elsie pressed herself against Clara's side. Clara forced her voice steady. "Please, sir." It cracked anyway. "We lost our mommy today. We have nowhere to go." The words hung between them, small and enormous at once. The man's jaw tightened, but his gaze did not harden. He stepped down from the porch slowly, as though approaching a skittish horse, and stopped close enough to see the dust streaks on their faces. "How long you been walking?" he asked. "Since morning." Anybody else with you? No, sir. He looked at Elsie's feet, at the torn blisters and dried blood, and something in his expression shifted. Not softened, but shifted, and he jerked his head toward the open door. Come inside before you fall over. Clara hesitated, every warning her mother ever gave about strangers ringing in her head, but thirst and exhaustion overruled fear, and she guided Elsie up the steps. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and clean wood and something steady, and the man filled their tin cup from a pitcher, handed it first to Elsie, and said, slow, when she gulped too fast, then cut thick slices of bread and set salted beef on a plate without ceremony. My name's Caleb Turner, he said after a moment. You can sit. Clara sat because her knees threatened to buckle, and Elsie ate like she had not seen food in days, which she had not, and Clara watched Caleb over the rim of the cup as she drank, trying to measure him the way her mother once measured customers at the wash line. He did not ask questions about why no one else took them in, did not press about kin, did not make promises he might not keep. When the plate was half empty, he leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. You're staying tonight, he said. Clara's fingers tightened around the cup. Just tonight, she asked, bracing for refusal. Caleb's gaze moved toward the hallway, toward a door that stood slightly ajar as though it had not been fully closed in a long while. And when he looked back at them, there was a depth in his eyes that Clara recognized, the look of someone who knew what it was to lose and keep breathing anyway. We'll figure out tomorrow when tomorrow gets here, he answered, and though it was not a promise, it was the first safe place Clara had heard all day. By sunrise the next morning, word had already spread through Dry Creek Township that Caleb Turner had taken in 2 orphan girls, and in a town where gossip moved faster than wind across prairie grass, that kind of news stirred more suspicion than sympathy. Clara woke in the small spare room, her eyes catching on the faded pencil marks along the doorframe, measurements of a child who had once grown there, each date stopping abruptly 3 years back. The silence in the house wasn't empty. It was the kind that remembered. In the kitchen, Caleb was cooking, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man long used to solitude. He set plates before Clara and Elsie without ceremony, and Elsie began asking questions about the ranch, the dog, the horses, her voice filling spaces grief had carved out. Caleb answered simply, but there was patience in it. Before noon, a firm knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Harriet Collins from the general store stepped in carrying a basket of biscuits. I'm not here to pry, she said plainly. I'm here because hungry children aren't a scandal. She studied the girls, then Caleb. Town's talking. Commissioner Edgar Hale heard already. A single rancher keeping 2 young girls? He'll call it improper. Might send them to the territorial home in Carson City. The words tightened Clara's chest. Caleb didn't argue, but his jaw hardened. They're not going anywhere, he said. Harriet's eyes held his. That may not be your choice alone. That afternoon Caleb rode into town to face Hale directly. The hours dragged, and Clara sat on the porch with her mother's worn notebook in her lap, wondering how quickly safety could vanish. When Caleb returned at dusk, dust trailing behind him, the look on his face told her enough. He's coming tomorrow, Caleb said. With deputies. And papers. Elsie went still. What kind of papers? Clara asked quietly. Custody transfer, he replied. Claims it's for your protection. The word protection felt sharp and hollow. Harriet returned soon after, clearly expecting the news. There's one way to stop him, she said steadily. The law can't remove children from a married household without cause. They need a female guardian present. The kitchen fell silent. Caleb looked at her carefully. You suggesting what I think you are? Harriet lifted her chin. I run my store alone. You run this ranch alone. These girls have no one. Seems simple to me. Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. Caleb paced once across the room, torn between pride and responsibility. Marriage isn't something you do just to outmaneuver a man like Hale, he said. Harriet didn't waver. No, it's something you do to protect children. The truth of it settled heavy in the room. Finally, Caleb stopped pacing. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, steadier, certain. If we do this, it won't be pretend. Harriet nodded once. If we do this, it won't be pretend. Elsie tugged Clara's hand. Does that mean we get to stay? She whispered. Clara squeezed her fingers, afraid to hope. Caleb stepped closer, his gaze firm. Nobody's sending you anywhere, he said. And this time, it sounded like a promise. Commissioner Edgar Hale arrived the next morning in a cloud of dust and authority, 2 deputies riding behind him, papers tucked neatly inside a leather case, as though children's lives could be folded and filed away without consequence. Clara saw them first from the porch, her stomach dropping as the horses slowed at the gate, and Elsie slipped her hand into hers without a word. Caleb stepped out of the barn, hat low over his brow, Harriet emerging from the house moments later with flowers still dusted on her sleeves, as if she had no intention of appearing anything other than exactly who she was. Hale dismounted stiffly, his expression already set in disapproval. "Mr. Turner," he said crisply, "I've come regarding the 2 minors currently in your custody." Clara felt the word custody like a hook. Caleb didn't move aside. "They're not livestock," he replied evenly. "They're girls." Hale opened his case and withdrew the documents. Without a lawful guardian arrangement, the territory is obligated to relocate them to Carson City. It is in their best interest. Harriet stepped forward before Clara's fear could rise any higher. "That won't be necessary," she said calmly. Hale's eyes narrowed. "And why is that, Mrs. Collins?" Harriet didn't hesitate. "Because as of this morning, I am no longer Mrs. Collins." She reached for Caleb's hand, not tentative, not uncertain, and held it firmly. "We were married at sunrise. Reverend Pike signed the certificate. You're welcome to inspect it." The deputies exchanged glances. Hale blinked once, clearly recalculating. Caleb met his gaze without flinching. "This is now a married household," he said, "with a legal guardian present." Harriet withdrew a folded document from her apron pocket and handed it over. Hale scanned it, jaw tightening with every line he read. The silence stretched long and brittle. Finally, he snapped the case shut. "Very well," he said curtly. "But understand this, the town will be watching." Harriet offered a thin smile. "It always does." Hale mounted his horse without another word, the deputies following, and the tension that had wrapped around Clara's ribs for 2 days finally loosened as the dust settled behind them. Elsie exhaled first, a small, shaky breath. "So we're staying?" she asked again, needing to hear it once more. Caleb crouched to her height, his voice softer than Clara had yet heard it. "You're home," he said simply. The word home echoed differently now, not fragile, not temporary, but rooted. In the weeks that followed, the ranch changed in quiet ways. Laughter returned to rooms that had held only silence. New pencil marks began climbing the spare bedroom doorframe beside the old faded ones, this time dated in fresh ink. Harriet moved into the house fully, her steady presence stitching together the practical corners of daily life, while Caleb taught Clara how to mend fencing and Elsie how to brush down the horses without startling them. The town did watch, just as Hale had warned, but watching turned, slowly, into accepting. Clara sometimes stood at the edge of the pasture at sunset, remembering the road they had walked barefoot and afraid, remembering the moment she had spoken those desperate words on a stranger's porch. She understood now that it had not been charity that saved them, nor pity, but choice. 2 adults choosing to stand firm when it would have been easier to step aside. One evening, as the sky burned orange behind the cottonwoods, Elsie leaned against Harriet's side and asked, "Do you think Mama knows?" Harriet brushed a curl from the child's face. "I think she hoped," she said gently. Caleb rested a hand on Clara's shoulder, solid and certain. And Clara, who had once believed that losing everything meant the story was over, realized that sometimes the bravest reply to "we have nowhere to go" is not sympathy. It is "then stay."